name is Michael from DB Services, and today we're going to be talking about how to integrate with Google Charts into your FileMaker solution. The first thing we're going to talk about is why you would need to integrate with Google Charts. FileMaker has its own built-in charting. However, there are several limitations that your business may need to get around. The first being a built-in FileMaker chart can only have up to 12 Y series on any graph. That means you can only have up to 12 lines per graph, and a lot of businesses might need more than that. The second is the limited CSS styling options. You can change colors, certain animations about your graph, but overall it is a lot more restrictive of what you can and cannot customize about your stylings. And the third is getting the data in the format that you want to show the actual end result that you need. Because you're going to be referencing fields or variables from the FileMaker charting, it can be difficult to gather and manipulate that data into the format you need in order to produce useful graphs. What are the main advantages of Google Charts? Google Charts supports over 27 different types of graphs, including geograph, scatter, column, bar, area, gauge, and a whole host of others. And on top of the definitely supported ones, there are community created graphs that you can download and also use. Now they aren't fully supported by Google, so some CSS options may or may not be available. But if you are looking for a particular graph that isn't among these supported ones, you can always check the community ones to see. Google Charts also allows you to fully customize the CSS of your chart that you're building. This is really useful. You can get all the way down to the nitty-gritty of the fonts on your specific labels, the annotations next to your graph saying like the actual Y values for it, tooltips, background colors, spacing, opacities. You can even customize which way your chart goes, if it goes vertical or horizontal. So now you know why you would want to use Google Charts. Let's talk about how to implement with Google Charts. So Google has a really nice quick start guide on their website, and I would say that you can get a chart going from start to using it, depending on how complex you want to go, in about 30 minutes. The main part of this is this right here. This is all going to be done in an HTML document, and we're going to put it into a web viewer to display our chart. This right here is the loader file. What this will do is kind of bring in all the functions and libraries that you'll need to create the charts and have them drawn. Since this is a internet-based solution, your file will need access to the internet in order for the charts to actually run. But you will call this loader. That will give you access to the Google Charts.load function. And here's where you'll select what type of chart you have, so that way it pulls in the proper loaders and functions for it from the actual package. And then you will create this draw chart function. Now this is where you specify your X and Y values and your headers. Most commonly, you'll be putting them into this data table, And there's several ways you can interact with this. I will show you one way. Here what they're doing is first they're adding the columns, and to do that you first specify what type it will be, and then you will specify the actual name of that column, and then next they're adding in the rows, so your actual X points and then your Y values. And then below that, we set our CSS options. So you'll see here, they just went with some simple ones where they added a title, and then they added the width and height of the chart. Finally, to actually draw the chart, you will create a chart object using the Google visualization tool. And whatever chart you have, so here they're creating a pie chart, so they use the visualization.pie_chart method. And then you'll set your chart ID, and then you'll call its draw, passing in the data and the options variable. And this will return to the web viewer a chart object that will be displayed. So if we go back over to the file here, one of the things we wanted to do was make implementing Google Charts simpler, to abstract away from creating the actual HTML document and the CSS. So we made a more data-driven solution to it. So if you create a new record in this table here from this layout, you're left with this blank form, and from here you can choose your chart type. So we're going to build a new bar chart. When you select a type, it will populate this CSS options checkboxes with what CSS options you do have available for that type. The data array, you don't need to worry about that, although if you wanted to, you can like statically populate this, and that's where your data will go. That's what the chart will use to pull in your data and display and render and display your chart. Here's the chart title, so we'll call this example chart, and we'll call this bar chart. We'll give it a height of 600, 750. I just want to change that so we don't have a double data entry. And then here is where you can paste a list of your X values, a list of your Y values, and the list of your header data. So the way that this works is ball, train, and kit are example X datas, and then 4, 3, and 8. So they should line up going down. So the first value of your X will go with the first value of your Y. And then we have our two headers here. And then this is an example of a CSS object. So by default, what it gives you is just the title, gives you a curve type, and then puts the legend on the bottom. That's just the default that we give. But if you want to build that to be different, what you do is you choose from here. So you see we have animations here. So you can check animations if you want. You could check background color, and we'll do chart area. And then you can come here, and what you'll see is there are different tabs for each of these different ones. So if we want to edit the background color, for example, we can either do that by building a color object ourselves. And what that requires is a fill color, which uses an HTML color string. So anything that's a valid HTML color string, for example, yellow is a valid color string. Stroke, which is the outside line surrounding our color. So we'll have a blue stroke. And then you can set the stroke width in pixels. So we'll set it to 3. And then what you can do is click Save CSS, and you'll see it put in our background color object with stroke of blue, stroke width 3, and fill yellow. So here what we can do is we can actually set what chart we want to use when building our chart on here. And you'll see I have an example chart already that was built. But here we have a simple products and order screen. So this order has these 3 products in these quantities. And if we want to generate a chart about them, we can click generate. And as you'll see, it builds a chart. There's our yellow background color. There's our blue stroke around our background. And then there's our bars. So you'll see that these are interactive in the web viewer. You can also print these out. So you can go to preview mode with them, and they will print out. This layout was not optimized for that, but yes, you can print these out in a report. So if we go back and we go back to our preferences, we can change it back to the bar, go to the orders, and if we click generate chart once again, you'll now see that because this chart was slightly different in its setup over here, where this one had an animation where it eases the chart in and out, and it happens on startup of the chart. So when we navigate there, every time this chart is first loaded on startup, it will play that animation. That gives you the ability to add some nice visuals to your graphs for users. So how does this work? What are the steps you're going to need to take in order to do this? So in order to generate that chart, what we do is we grab which chart we're going to be building off of. What we did is we created a relationship from order to our preferences table to grab in that value. Then what we will do is we'll grab a list of our X values. And so one thing that should be noted is Google Charts expects strings because it's JavaScript based to be placed in single quotes. And so you can either add a calculation, or what we did here is we just substituted the single quotes onto our list after grabbing it. But that's for string values only. For Y values, because it's a quantity, we did not need that. So we just grabbed a list of those. And then we set our headers, which were strings, so we did wrap them in the single quotes. And then all we do is we have a relationship from our order to our Google chart through that chart ID. And that chart ID is getting pulled again from that preferences table. So we set that, we have our global relationship, and I'll show you how that's set up in a minute. We set the X, the Y, and the headers. And then what we do is that'll trigger the chart to recalculate its web code. It'll spit us back our web code, and what we'll do is we'll set that web viewer to our newly calculated web code. We'll commit that, and what we get as a result is this chart. So how does the Google Charts, how does this work? How does this generate this? What this does is uses auto enters to build out and display our Google data. It also uses some custom functions to pass data as JSON. So what it does is anytime you change the data, we have a series of calculations and auto enters that fire, like this ZCT chart. And what that'll do is it'll do a substitution on our draw chart function, substituting out the chart for whatever type of visualization. That's that package that I was talking about earlier. It'll substitute out the data for the data that you've entered into it, and it'll substitute your CSS options to the formatted CSS that we have. It'll drop all of that into its web code. And from there, it is stored on this chart. And so these are individual records themselves. So you'll always have access to that web code on each individual chart since they are independent. This means that you can build out multiple different types of charts and just pull in their web code and replace in the web viewers that you want to display them on, rather than always having to completely rebuild and re-pull in data. And lastly, I want to talk about how the CSS styling works. So all this is a script that goes down and just checks to see if you have selected that you want to include this type. So here it'll say, do we have an animation in our CSS options? Yes. And then it'll go through and check to see which ones you've actually filled out and build out that object for you. And then at the end, all it will do is stick those into this CSS stylings. You optionally, if there are other CSS stylings that you find that you want to implement that you can't find here in the list of options, you can always build what you want in here, take it out, add your options into this block, and then just paste it back in, as it won't overwrite what you're attempting to do. And that will allow you to also build your own CSS. Or if you don't like any of these options and you don't want to do this and you know CSS well enough, you can just paste your CSS over this. And again, these are also saved per chart. So each chart will have its own unique CSS styling. I do want to mention that to do more complex charting, you'll have to get a little bit neat with how you pull in your data, as the arrays for certain charts, such as line charts. I want to just reference Google's documents for this. As you can see, here we have our headers, and here we have our X value, and then we have our two Y values associated with the X value. So that's for making multiple series, whereas line charts are like the most common one that you're going to be creating multiple lines for, or multiple data points for. So what you can do with this is when you pull in your data, you'll have your X value, and then you'll need to pull in the Y values associated with that X value. And that can get a little complicated as it requires you to sequentially build out the two lines as you go down. Instead of building one line and then the other, you're building both at the same time. So you can kind of, what you got to do is think of it as an array where you're populating your X as the 0, this as your 1 and 2, and then you just keep going down as 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. the final thing I want to mention here is the CSS stylings. So Google's documentation on this is very well done and well put out. They have a lot of good examples on here. So if you're trying to do something yourself or you need help knowing what your options actually are, you can reference this Google chart documentation and you can find your styling that you're looking for. So if we wanted to add a box style to our annotations, we can look. They have a nice example of what a fully implemented box style could be, and then they break down the individual items in it, and they give you like what the default stylings are, what type it is, which gives you a really helpful way to kind of know what you're trying to build. And then if you do need to reference that documentation, if you click this Go to API Doc button, it'll take you to the documentation for that specific chart. So whatever the type of chart it is, it'll take you right to that documentation for your reference. So in summary, what we talked about is why you should integrate with Google Charts and what the main advantages over native FileMaker charting is. And then we also discussed how to create Google Charts, and we showed an example of a chart being demonstrated or created, and we demonstrated how we are creating these as well as how the CSS stylings function. If you are interested in implementing these into your FileMaker system, please reach out to us at DB Services and we can come up with a solution that best works for you. Thank you. Have a great day.